The first time I told him no, the entire city seemed to hold its breath. Rain slammed against the windows of Bennett Community Clinic hard enough to rattle the ancient glass panes in their frames. November in Chicago always felt personal somehow. Cold that crawled under your skin. Wind that sounded like someone whispering warnings down empty streets. I locked the front door at exactly 10:43 p.m., my shoulders aching from a 14-hour shift and my sneakers soaked through from the leaking pipe in exam room 3. The fluorescent lights above me buzzed softly while I counted the cash drawer for the second time, because being exhausted made me paranoid about mistakes. Outside, headlights slid across the rain-slick street like ghosts before disappearing into darkness. I just wanted my apartment, my microwaved ramen, my heating pad, and 6 hours of sleep before doing it all over again tomorrow. That was the plan until someone knocked on the clinic door. Not loudly, not desperately, just 3 slow knocks that somehow made the tiny hairs on my arms lift anyway. I glanced toward the frosted glass. A tall figure stood outside beneath the broken awning, one hand braced against the wall, like staying upright required effort. "We're closed," I called automatically while reaching for my coat. The figure didn't move. Another flash of lightning illuminated the street for half a second, and that was when I noticed the dark stain spreading across the front of his white dress shirt beneath an expensive black coat. Blood. My stomach tightened immediately. No, absolutely not. I'd grown up enough around bad decisions to recognize one standing on my doorstep. I unlocked the door halfway, keeping the chain latched. "You need a hospital," I said. The man slowly lifted his head. God. He looked like the kind of man people wrote warnings about. Early 30s maybe. Dark hair damp from rain. Sharp cheekbones. A face too calm for someone bleeding through a $1,000 shirt. But it was his eyes that stopped me. Pale green. Steady. Completely unreadable. "I only need stitches," he said quietly. His voice was low, controlled, the kind that didn't need volume to command attention. Somewhere down the block, thunder rolled across the city. I tightened my grip on the door. "Then go to the ER." One corner of his mouth moved slightly, not quite a smile. "I can't." Every instinct in my body screamed that this man brought trouble with him the way storms carried lightning. "Look," I said, already shaking my head. "I'm not losing my medical license because some guy in a designer coat got into a fight." His gaze flickered over my face like he was memorizing it. "You think I'm dangerous. I think you're bleeding on my doorstep." For the first time, something shifted in his expression. Not anger. Surprise. Like people usually reacted differently to him. Like they usually rushed to obey. Behind him, a black SUV turned the corner too fast before stopping at the curb. My pulse jumped immediately. Another SUV appeared behind it. Men in dark coats stepped out, scanning the street with sharp, practiced movements. Security. Definitely not normal security either. The man never looked back at them. His eyes stayed on mine. "Claire," he said softly. My blood ran cold. I had never told him my name. "How do you know who I am?" Rainwater dripped from his coat onto the cracked concrete between us. One of the men near the SUV started toward the clinic, but the stranger lifted 2 fingers slightly without looking away from me. The man stopped instantly. That tiny gesture scared me more than the blood did. "You should lock your door tonight," he said. "Why?" Another pause. Another roll of thunder. "Because people who were looking for me," he said calmly, "may decide to look for you next." Every muscle in my body went rigid. "What exactly did you do?" His expression turned distant for half a second. Tired, almost. Then the mask slipped back into place. "Nothing the city would forgive." Before I could answer, one of the suited men hurried forward holding an umbrella over him. "Mr. Moretti," he said urgently, "we need to leave now." The stranger kept staring at me for one long second before stepping backward into the rain. "You made the right choice tonight," he said quietly. "Most people don't when they meet me." Then he turned and disappeared toward the black SUVs while cold rain hammered the sidewalk hard enough to drown out my heartbeat. I stood frozen behind the locked door watching the convoy vanish into the storm, and somehow I already knew my life had just split into 2 parts. Before him, and after. I barely slept that night. Every creak in my apartment building sounded like footsteps stopping outside my door. Every pair of headlights sliding across my bedroom ceiling made my chest tighten. By 3 in the morning, I had checked the lock on my front door 6 times and convinced myself I was being dramatic at least 20. But the problem was that men like him did not feel dramatic. They felt inevitable. Morning came gray and wet, Chicago wrapped in freezing drizzle that turned sidewalks into mirrors. I stopped at a corner coffee shop before opening the clinic, mostly because caffeine felt cheaper than therapy. The television above the counter played the morning news while exhausted commuters stood around clutching paper cups and pretending not to hate their lives. I was halfway through paying when a photo flashed across the screen behind the anchorwoman. My stomach dropped so hard I nearly missed the change in my hand. Dark hair, pale green eyes, calm expression. Him. Authorities continue investigating the overnight fire at a warehouse near the River District, the anchorwoman said smoothly. Anonymous sources claim the building was tied to organized crime operations connected to the Moretti family. The camera switched to shaky footage of black SUVs parked outside police barricades while reporters shouted questions into microphones. Then his name appeared beneath the screen in bold white letters. Damien Moretti. A man beside me muttered softly under his breath. Jesus. Another customer lowered his voice instinctively. That guy runs half the city. More like owns it, someone else whispered. The coffee suddenly tasted bitter in my mouth. I stared at the screen while the reporter continued talking about corruption investigations, political donations, luxury hotels, charities, and rumors nobody dared confirm publicly. But none of that matched the image burned into my memory from the night before. Rain dripping from expensive black wool, blood on white fabric, eyes too calm to belong to someone ordinary. You made the right choice tonight. Most people do not when they meet me. My pulse thudded painfully in my throat. The television moved on to weather updates, but the room still felt colder somehow. Like his name had changed the temperature. By the time I reached the clinic, I had convinced myself the smartest thing to do was forget the entire encounter happened. Open the doors. Treat patients. Stay invisible. That was my plan right up until I noticed the new security camera above the front entrance. I stopped dead on the sidewalk. Yesterday, that camera had not existed. Neither had the black SUV parked across the street with tinted windows dark enough to hide whoever sat inside. A chill crawled slowly down my spine. Inside the clinic, things got stranger. The landlord's final eviction notice that had been taped to my office door all week was gone. The flickering hallway lights had somehow been repaired overnight. Even the ancient radiator that had not worked properly since October suddenly blasted heat through the building hard enough to fog the windows. Morning, Claire. Mrs. Delgado called from reception with a surprised smile. You would not believe this. Believe what? She held up a stack of papers. Anonymous donation. $20,000. I froze. What? It came through online around 4 this morning. No name attached. My stomach twisted immediately because deep down I already knew. That is not all, she added carefully. Someone also paid 6 months of overdue rent. The room tilted slightly around me. Outside the clinic windows, rain continued falling in silver sheets across the city while traffic crawled through the morning fog. Somewhere out there was a man powerful enough to erase problems before breakfast. A man the news spoke about like a storm people survived instead of stopped. And somehow, for reasons I did not understand yet, Damien Moretti had decided to notice me. Then my phone vibrated in the pocket of my coat. Unknown number. I stared at it for 3 full seconds before answering. Silence greeted me first. Quiet breathing. Then his voice. Low. Controlled. Impossible to mistake. Did you lock your door last night, Claire? The sound of his voice did something terrible to my nervous system. Not loud. Not threatening. Somehow that made it worse. I stood frozen beside the reception desk while rain tapped softly against the clinic windows and Mrs. Delgado continued sorting paperwork 10 feet away, completely unaware that the most feared man in Chicago was speaking directly into my ear. How did you get this number? I asked quietly. A faint pause. Then, you are asking the wrong question. My grip tightened around the phone. Then what is the right question? Outside. The black SUV across the street remained parked beneath the gray morning sky, like a shadow refusing to leave. The right question, Damien said calmly, is why someone tried to follow you home last night. Every breath caught halfway in my chest. What? Dark blue sedan. 2 men inside. They parked outside your building for 37 minutes after midnight. The room suddenly felt too warm. How do you know that? Another pause. Controlled. Careful. Because I had someone watching your apartment. Anger arrived before fear did. Sharp and immediate. You had me followed? Protected. I do not remember asking for protection. No, he said softly. You did not. Something about the way he answered made me more unsettled than if he had sounded angry. There was no ego in his voice. No frustration. Just certainty. Like this conversation was already decided in his mind, and I simply had not caught up yet. I moved farther into the hallway away from reception. Listen to me carefully, I whispered. Whatever this is, I do not want any part of it. For the first time, his voice lowered slightly. That stopped being possible the moment you opened the clinic door for me. Silence stretched between us while my pulse hammered painfully behind my ribs. I hated that part of me already believed him. Who were those men? I finally asked. People who assume attention can be used as leverage. Leverage for what? Another quiet exhale through the phone. Against me. My stomach twisted hard enough to hurt. I pressed my free hand against the wall beside me. I should go to the police. That earned the faintest sound, almost like amusement. Not mocking. Tired. Claire, he said gently. The police commissioner attended my charity gala 3 weeks ago. The words settled into me slowly like cold rain soaking through fabric. Oh God. Suddenly the repaired hallway lights. The paid rent. The security camera. The SUV outside. None of it felt generous anymore. It felt powerful. Carefully controlled. Like invisible hands rearranging pieces around me before I even realized I was on the board. Why are you doing this? I whispered. The line stayed quiet for 2 full seconds. Because you looked at me last night like I was still human. My throat tightened unexpectedly. I did not know what answer I had expected, but it was not that. Across the clinic, the front door opened with a gust of cold wind. A mother walked in carrying a coughing little boy wrapped in a red winter coat. Normal life. Real life. The kind untouched by men like Damian Moretti. Or at least that was what I used to believe. I have patience, I said quickly, needing distance from whatever this conversation was becoming. Claire. Just my name. Low and steady through the speaker. I closed my eyes briefly. What? Do not leave the clinic alone tonight. Fear prickled slowly across the back of my neck again. You are not explaining nearly enough for someone giving orders. His voice hardened slightly for the first time. And you are not scared enough for someone being watched. Before I could answer, the line disconnected. I stared down at my phone while the rain outside intensified against the windows. Then movement across the street caught my eye. The driver door of the black SUV opened briefly. A man in a dark coat stepped out, scanned the sidewalk, then looked directly toward the clinic windows. Toward me. He lifted one hand slightly to his ear like he was listening to instructions through an earpiece. And somehow I knew without being told exactly who was still on the other end of that invisible line. By 6 that evening, I had convinced myself I was overreacting. People did not just become targets because they stitched up the wrong man. Life was not a movie. Dangerous men did not suddenly appear in your world and change everything overnight. Except every time I started believing that, I would glance out the clinic window and see another black SUV somewhere nearby. Never parked in the exact same spot twice. Always close enough to remind me. The rain finally stopped around sunset, leaving the streets slick and glowing beneath Chicago's amber streetlights. Inside the clinic, the radiator hissed softly while the smell of antiseptic and burnt coffee clung to the air. Mrs. Delgado left around 7 after reminding me 3 times not to stay too late. You look pale, she said while buttoning her coat. Get some sleep tonight. I forced a smile. That is the plan. But an hour later I was still sitting at my desk buried in insurance forms and unpaid invoices while exhaustion pressed behind my eyes like bruises. The clinic had never felt this quiet before. Every sound carried too far. The ticking wall clock. The hum of fluorescent lights. The distant siren somewhere downtown. I was reviewing patient files when the front door buzzer sounded softly. My entire body went still. One buzz. Calm. Patient. Not random. Slowly, I looked toward the frosted glass entrance at the end of the hallway. A tall silhouette stood outside. My pulse immediately betrayed me. I should not have opened the door. I knew that before I even stood up. But curiosity is a dangerous thing when fear starts mixing with fascination. I unlocked the deadbolt carefully and pulled the door open halfway. Damian Moretti stood beneath the pale glow of the hallway light, wearing a charcoal overcoat over black dress clothes that looked painfully expensive. His dark hair was slightly damp from mist rolling off Lake Michigan, and one hand rested casually in the pocket of his coat, while the other held a small white pharmacy bag. The sight of him standing there made the tiny clinic suddenly feel too small for both of us. "You should stop doing that," I said quietly. "Doing what?" Appearing out of nowhere. His eyes flickered over my face slowly like he was checking for something. "You look tired." I crossed my arms immediately. "You did not answer my question." One corner of his mouth moved faintly. "Neither did you." God, I hated how calm he always sounded. Like nothing in the world surprised him anymore. My gaze dropped toward the pharmacy bag. "What is that?" "Antibiotics. For the stitches you refused to give me." I blinked once. "You came here to make a point?" "Partially." The honesty caught me off guard. He extended the bag slightly toward me. "The pharmacist insisted I should finish the full prescription." "Then maybe you should listen to the pharmacist." Another almost smile touched his face before disappearing. There was something unsettling about realizing a man like Damien Moretti barely smiled at all. Like warmth had become unfamiliar to him somewhere along the way. "May I come in?" he asked. The question itself shocked me more than if he had simply walked inside. A man powerful enough to buy half the city standing in my doorway, actually asking permission. I hesitated too long because his gaze sharpened slightly. "You are deciding whether I look dangerous tonight," he observed quietly. "You always look dangerous. And yet you opened the door anyway." "Fair point." I stepped aside before common sense could stop me. The scent of rain and expensive cologne followed him into the clinic while the hallway lights reflected softly against the marble watch at his wrist. He moved through the space slowly, studying the faded walls, old furniture, and cracked ceiling tiles without judgment. Most wealthy people looked uncomfortable here. Damien looked attentive. "This is where you spend 14 hours a day?" he asked. "Sometimes 16. His expression darkened slightly. "For this?" I glanced around the tiny clinic. Not everyone can afford private hospitals. That was not criticism. His voice stayed low. It was anger. The answer unsettled me more than it should have. Before I could respond, his phone buzzed once inside his coat pocket. The change in him happened instantly. Tiny. Almost invisible. But I noticed it anyway. The warmth disappeared from his eyes like someone shutting off a light. He checked the message briefly before lifting his gaze back to me. "I need you to listen carefully now." My stomach tightened. "Why?" Damien stepped closer, not enough to threaten me, just enough that I could see the faint exhaustion beneath his controlled expression. "Because someone asked about you tonight," he said quietly. By name. Something cold slid slowly down my spine. "Who asked about me?" Damien did not answer immediately. That bothered me more than the words themselves. He stood near the reception desk with one hand resting lightly against the counter while the clinic lights cast pale gold across the sharp lines of his face. Outside, the wind had picked up again, rattling the windows softly. "A man named Viktor Sokolov," he finally said. "That means nothing to me. It should stay that way." My patience snapped before my fear did. "You cannot walk into my clinic, tell me dangerous people suddenly know my name, then act mysterious about it." His jaw tightened slightly. Tiny movement. Easy to miss unless you were already watching him too closely. "Mysterious keeps people alive." "No," I shot back. "Communication does." For half a second, silence settled between us, heavy and electric. Most people probably backed down around him. I could feel it in the air somehow. The weight of a man used to obedience. Used to rooms going quiet when he entered them. But exhaustion had stripped away my common sense hours ago. Damien studied me carefully, and something unreadable flickered through his pale green eyes. Not anger. Almost curiosity. "You are very comfortable arguing with me," he said quietly. "Maybe because I did not grow up terrified of your last name." Another almost smile touched his mouth before disappearing again. God, that tiny expression was becoming dangerous. "That makes one of us," he murmured. I looked away first, suddenly aware of how close he stood. The clinic felt smaller every minute he remained inside it. Too warm, too quiet, too aware of him. I moved behind the reception desk mostly to put space between us. "So what exactly happens now?" "Now." He slipped his phone back into his coat pocket. "Now you stop walking home alone." "Absolutely not." "Claire." "No." I grabbed a stack of patient files just to give my hands something to do. "You do not get to rearrange my life because you showed up bleeding in my doorway." His gaze followed every movement calmly. I already did. The honesty hit harder than arrogance would have. I hated that part of me knew he was right. The repaired clinic. The security camera. The SUV outside. My entire week had quietly bent around his presence without my permission. Why me? I whispered before I could stop myself. That question changed something in his expression instantly. The cold control slipped just enough for exhaustion to show beneath it. Real exhaustion. The kind that lived in someone's bones. I ask myself that constantly, he admitted softly. The answer stole my next breath. Before I could recover, headlights swept briefly across the clinic windows from outside. Damien's attention shifted immediately toward the street. Every muscle in his body seemed to sharpen at once. Predator instinct. Dangerous men probably survived because they noticed everything. He stepped toward the window slowly without pulling the curtain aside completely. Stay back, he said quietly. You are not exactly making me feel calmer. That was never my talent. He glanced outside for 3 silent seconds before relaxing slightly. Delivery truck. I stared at him. You live like this all the time? Like what? Like someone is always watching. A faint shadow crossed his face. Someone usually is. For the first time since meeting him, genuine sympathy slipped through my fear unexpectedly. It happened before I could stop it, because suddenly I saw past the tailored coat, an expensive watch, and terrifying reputation. I saw a man who checked windows before speaking. A man who memorized exits automatically. A man who carried silence around him like armor because trust had probably become impossible years ago. Damien looked back at me slowly, and somehow I knew he saw the sympathy in my face immediately. His expression hardened at once. Walls going back up. Do not feel sorry for me, Claire. I was not. Lie. Terrible lie. One corner of his mouth moved slightly. You are a very bad liar. And you are very controlling. That one is true. Against all logic, a quiet laugh escaped me before I could stop it. The sound surprised both of us. Damien went completely still, watching me like he had not expected warmth to exist in this conversation at all. Then softly, almost to himself, he said, I had forgotten what that sounded like. The silence after that felt strangely fragile. Like we had both stepped too close to something honest, and neither of us knew what to do with it. Damien looked away first, his attention drifting toward the rain-streaked clinic windows while the old radiator hissed softly behind us. For a man the entire city feared, he suddenly looked exhausted enough to sleep for a week. You should go home, I said quietly. That sounds dangerously close to concern. That sounds dangerously close to manipulation. Another faint almost smile. Then his expression settled back into calm control. Fair. I grabbed my coat from the chair beside the desk, mostly because standing still around him had become unsettling in ways I did not want to examine too closely. I can take care of myself. That statement becomes less convincing every time you say it. You do realize normal people do not enjoy being monitored. Normal people are not connected to me. There it was again, that strange certainty in his voice. Not possessive exactly, just absolute. Like Damien Moretti had spent too many years carrying responsibility for things nobody else could survive. I shoved my arms into my coat harder than necessary. You keep talking like I am involved in your life now. His gaze returned to mine slowly. You are. The answer landed heavily somewhere beneath my ribs. Before I could respond, his phone buzzed again. This time irritation flashed briefly across his face before disappearing behind control. He glanced at the screen and exhaled quietly through his nose. I need to leave. Relief should have been the first thing I felt. Instead, something strange settled in my chest. Disappointment. Which was ridiculous. Dangerous men should leave. Smart women should let them. Damien slipped the phone back into his coat and reached for the pharmacy bag resting on the counter. Take the antibiotics anyway, he said. I am not taking medication prescribed for someone else. You are impossibly stubborn, and you are used to getting your way. Usually. The word lingered softly between us. Usually, meaning not with me. For some reason that mattered more than it should have. He stepped toward the front entrance while I followed several feet behind, careful to keep distance between us that somehow still felt too small. At the door, Damien paused with one hand resting against the handle. The cold wind outside whistled faintly through the cracks in the old building. A driver will take you home tonight, he said without turning around. No, Claire. No, he finally looked back at me, and God, those eyes were exhausting. Calm, steady, patient in a way that felt more dangerous than anger ever could. You continue mistaking this for a request, and you continue mistaking me for someone you can order around. The corner of his jaw flexed slightly. Not frustration, more like restraint. Do you know? he said quietly. How many people in this city would do anything I asked without hesitation? Probably too many. That answer stopped him for half a second. I could actually see the moment it landed. Then something unexpectedly warm flickered behind his guarded expression. Respect, maybe. You really are not afraid of me, he murmured. I think I should be. But you are not. I crossed my arms tightly against the cold creeping through the clinic doorway. I think you are more dangerous to yourself than you are to me. Silence. Complete silence. Damien stared at me like I had just spoken a language nobody else remembered anymore. The city outside hummed faintly beneath the rain and distant traffic while neither of us moved. Then very softly, almost careful, he asked, "What makes you say that?" I looked at him standing there in his expensive black coat, carrying exhaustion behind his eyes like hidden weight. A man who watched exits automatically. A man who trusted nobody. A man who looked lonelier than anyone I had met in years despite controlling half the city. Because, I said quietly, people who spend their lives controlling everything usually do it because something inside them already feels broken. The words settled hard between us. Damien went completely still. No smile. No sarcasm. Nothing. For the first time since meeting him, I had the terrifying realization that I might have actually reached him. Then slowly, carefully, like he was handling something fragile, Damien opened the clinic door. Cold wind rushed inside around him, carrying the scent of rain and winter streets. He paused once more before stepping out into the night. "Lock the door after me, Claire," he said softly. "Please." For 3 days, I did not see Damien Moretti. That should have made my life feel normal again. Instead, it felt like waiting for thunder after lightning already split the sky open. The black SUVs still appeared occasionally across the street from the clinic, never close enough to seem obvious, always close enough to remind me. At night, someone walked half a block behind me whenever I left work. Never approaching, never speaking, just there. Protection disguised as distance. It irritated me more than it comforted me. By Friday evening, Chicago had transformed into glass and gold beneath fresh snowfall. Tiny white flakes drifted past the clinic windows while Christmas lights reflected across wet sidewalks downtown. Mrs. Delgado left early to visit her grandchildren, leaving me alone with paperwork and a headache growing steadily behind my eyes. I was locking the medicine cabinet when my phone buzzed against the desk. Unknown number again. My pulse betrayed me instantly. "What now?" I answered quietly. Soft silence greeted me first. Then his voice. That is an unfriendly way to answer the phone. I leaned against the counter before realizing I was doing it. "You keep calling like some kind of emotionally unavailable Batman." A pause. Then unexpectedly, a low laugh. Real this time. Warm enough to catch me completely off guard. God help me. The sound did something dangerous to my heartbeat. "That may be the strangest thing anyone has ever called me," Damien admitted. "You should interact with healthier people." I tried once. It was disappointing. I closed my eyes briefly, fighting a smile I absolutely should not have been having during a conversation with a man linked to organized crime investigations. "Why are you calling?" "I need a favor." Immediately suspicious. "No, you do not even know what it is." "Historically, your requests tend to ruin my peace." Another quiet laugh through the phone. "Fair observation." Snow tapped softly against the clinic windows while traffic hummed outside in the distance. I waited. Damien finally spoke again, slower this time. "I need you to attend a dinner with me tonight." My entire body stiffened. "Absolutely not." "Claire." "No, it is not a date." That somehow makes it worse. I heard movement on his end of the line. The faint sound of a car door shutting. Men speaking quietly somewhere nearby before silence returned again. "There are people asking questions about you," he said calmly. "People stop asking questions when they see someone beside me." I hated that the logic made sense. "You want me to pretend to belong in your world for one night?" "No," he corrected softly. "I want my world to understand they should leave you alone." The honesty knocked the argument out of me for a second. Snow continued falling heavier outside, while the old clinic heater hummed softly behind me. I do not own anything appropriate for whatever terrifying billionaire cave you eat dinner in. You think I am a billionaire? I think you probably own at least 3 helicopters. Another low laugh. "Only one." I rubbed my forehead immediately. That was not reassuring. 7 o'clock, he continued smoothly. "A driver will pick you up." You really struggle with hearing the word no. Only when it comes from you. Silence again. Dangerous silence. the kind that lingered too long beneath your skin. Why? I asked before I could stop myself. His voice lowered slightly. Because when everyone fears you, honesty becomes rare. My chest tightened unexpectedly. I stared out at the snow-covered Chicago streets while his words settled somewhere deeper than they should have. Then common sense finally returned. Barely. This is a terrible idea. Probably. People are going to stare. Yes. I am going to hate every second of it. A pause. Softer now. No. Damien said quietly. You are going to see who I really am. Before I could answer, the clinic buzzer sounded sharply downstairs. My stomach dropped immediately. Someone is here, I whispered. Damien's tone changed at once, calm hardening into focus. Do not open the door. Another buzz echoed through the empty clinic. Longer this time. Slower. Then a man's voice drifted faintly through the intercom speaker below. Claire Bennett. Every hair on my arms lifted instantly, because I had never heard that voice before in my life. My pulse started pounding so hard I could hear it over the buzzing intercom. Snow drifted quietly past the clinic windows while the stranger downstairs waited for an answer I suddenly did not want to give. Claire, Damien's voice cut sharply through the phone. Calm, focused, dangerous in a way I had never heard before. Step away from the door. I swallowed hard. Who is he? Describe him. Another buzz echoed through the building before I could move toward the security monitor beside reception. My fingers shook slightly as I pressed the button. The grainy black and white screen flickered to life. A man stood outside the clinic entrance wearing a dark wool coat dusted with snow. Mid-40s maybe. Tall. Balding slightly. One gloved hand resting casually in his pocket while the other held a paper coffee cup. He smiled directly into the camera. My stomach twisted instantly. There was something wrong about the smile. Too relaxed. Too comfortable. Like he already belonged there. Claire, Damien repeated. Brown coat. Gray scarf. Holding coffee. Silence hit the line for half a second. Then softly, almost under his breath, Damien muttered something in Italian I did not understand. It did not sound good. Do not answer the door, he said immediately. I was not planning to. Lock the office hallway too. My chest tightened. Damien, who is he? Someone testing boundaries. Another slow buzz sounded downstairs. The man glanced up toward the camera again before speaking into the intercom once more. Miss Bennett? I only want to talk. Every instinct in my body screamed no. I stepped backward from the monitor automatically. How does he know where I work? Because people have been watching you. Fear finally settled fully into my bloodstream then. Real fear. Heavy and cold. You said your people were protecting me. They are. This does not feel protected. Silence again. Then more quietly. No, it does not. I wrapped my free arm around myself while the clinic suddenly felt too exposed. Too small. Old windows. Weak locks. Thin walls. How far away are you? I asked before I could stop myself. Another pause. 10 minutes. Something embarrassing loosened slightly in my chest at that answer. Relief. Actual relief. God. This man was becoming dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with crime. The stranger buzzed the intercom again. Longer this time. Patient. Claire Bennett. He called pleasantly through the speaker. You really should choose better company. My blood ran cold. Damien's voice dropped instantly. Go into your office. Now. I moved immediately this time. No argument. No sarcasm. Just fast footsteps across the clinic floor while my breathing turned shallow. I locked the office door behind me and pressed the phone tighter against my ear. What does he want? Information. About you. About us. The word has hit harder than it should have. Before I could process that, headlights swept suddenly across the clinic windows outside. Tires hissed against wet pavement. Then another set. And another. Black SUVs. My breath caught instantly. Through the office blinds, I watched dark vehicles slide silently to the curb outside the clinic one after another. Doors opened almost in sync. Men stepped out wearing dark coats and earpieces, moving with sharp, controlled purpose through the falling snow. The stranger downstairs noticed them too. I saw him glance toward the street through the security monitor. For the first time, his smile disappeared. Damien, I whispered. Are those your people? Yes. The single word settled something terrified inside me immediately, which should have alarmed me more than it did. Downstairs, the stranger adjusted his scarf calmly before stepping backward away from the clinic entrance. One of Damien's men approached him near the sidewalk, speaking quietly enough that the security camera could not pick up the conversation. But I noticed something else instead. Pedestrians crossing the street lowered their eyes. A taxi immediately turned around instead of stopping nearby. Even from blocks away, Damian Moretti's presence changed the atmosphere of an entire city. Then the office door behind me rattled softly. I spun around so fast my shoulder hit the filing cabinet. Claire, Damian's voice again, but not through the phone, directly outside my office. My heart nearly stopped. I stared at the closed door in complete disbelief while his voice came again, lower now. Open the door. My hand shook slightly as I unlocked the office door. The second it opened, Damian stepped inside and closed it quietly behind him. The movement was smooth, controlled, efficient in a way that reminded me he lived in a world where hesitation could get people hurt. Snow clung lightly to the shoulders of his black coat, already melting beneath the office lights. He looked at me first. Not the room, not the windows. Me, like confirming I was unharmed mattered before anything else. Are you all right? The question caught me off guard. You are asking me that now? His jaw tightened faintly. Claire, some strange man just showed up outside my clinic because apparently being connected to you has turned my life into a psychological thriller. Something dangerous flickered behind his eyes, then disappeared almost immediately beneath restraint. I told you this would become complicated. Complicated, I whispered sharply. You have armed men outside my building. Protecting you. From what? Silence. Heavy silence. Damian looked away briefly toward the frosted office window before answering. From people who think fear is leverage. I stared at him. You keep saying things like that instead of giving actual answers. Because actual answers put you in more danger. My frustration cracked open completely then. You do not get to decide what I can handle. That hit him. I saw it immediately. Tiny shift in posture. Eyes sharpening slightly. No, he said quietly. You are right. I do not. The calm agreement stole the momentum out of my anger instantly. Damian exhaled slowly and removed his gloves one finger at a time before setting them carefully on the desk beside him. Expensive leather. Precise movements. Everything about him felt disciplined to the point of exhaustion. Viktor Sokolov controls most of the trafficking routes near the ports, he explained finally. For years he stayed away from civilians because it kept attention away from his operations. Recently that changed. My stomach tightened. And now he is looking for weaknesses. Outside the office, muffled footsteps echoed somewhere inside the clinic hallway. Damian's attention shifted automatically toward the sound before relaxing again a second later. Hyper-aware. Always. And I am your weakness now? I asked softly. His gaze returned to mine immediately. Yes. No hesitation. No softening. Just truth. The honesty knocked the air from my lungs. I should have been terrified. Maybe part of me was. But another part could not stop noticing how tired he looked saying it. Like admitting vulnerability physically cost him something. You barely know me, I whispered. That has not stopped this from matching. Silence stretched between us while snow continued drifting outside the clinic windows in slow white spirals. Somewhere downtown, a siren wailed faintly through the winter night before disappearing again. I folded my arms tightly across my chest mostly to steady myself. So what happens now? Damian studied me carefully for several seconds before speaking. Now you come with me tonight. To the dinner. Yes. I laughed once under my breath in disbelief. You really think throwing me into your world is somehow safer? No, he admitted calmly. I think hiding you would make you look vulnerable. God. The terrifying part was that his logic actually made sense. I do not belong in your world, Damian. Something softened briefly in his expression at the sound of his first name. Neither do I anymore, he said quietly. The answer settled somewhere deep inside me before I could stop it. Then his phone buzzed sharply inside his coat pocket. Damian glanced down at the screen, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop instantly. What? I asked. He read the message once before locking the phone again. Every trace of warmth disappeared behind that controlled mask I was beginning to understand too well. We need to leave now. My pulse jumped immediately. Why? Damian stepped closer, lowering his voice. Because Viktor just sent flowers to your apartment. Fear crawled slowly down my spine. Flowers. His pale green eyes locked onto mine steadily. White roses, he said quietly. In my world, that is not a gift. Snow blurred the city outside as Damien drove me through downtown Chicago in absolute silence. The inside of the black Mercedes smelled faintly of leather and cedar, warm against the freezing storm outside the windows. Streetlights slid across his face in flashes of gold and shadow while his hands stayed steady on the steering wheel. Calm. Controlled. Too calm for someone who had just told me another dangerous man was sending messages to my apartment. I sat rigid in the passenger seat, clutching my coat tighter around myself, while my thoughts spiraled fast enough to make me dizzy. White roses mean what exactly? I finally asked quietly. Damien's jaw flexed once before relaxing again. Respectfully speaking, I would prefer honesty. His pale green eyes stayed fixed on the road ahead. It means someone wants me to understand they can reach you whenever they choose. Cold spread slowly through my chest. The city outside suddenly looked unfamiliar. Darker somehow. Every stranger on the sidewalk now felt like someone watching. This is insane, I whispered. Yes. And you are still taking me to dinner? Finally, Damien glanced at me briefly. I am taking you somewhere nobody would dare touch you. That is supposed to comfort me? It should. The terrifying part was that it actually did. Because sitting beside him inside that car felt strangely safe in a way I did not want to examine too closely. Outside, snow coated the city in silver while traffic crawled beneath glowing skyscrapers. Chicago looked beautiful during storms. Cold and cinematic and lonely. Damien fit into it too perfectly. Do you ever get tired? I asked suddenly. He looked over again, faint surprise flickering across his expression. Of what? Living like this. His gaze returned to the road. You assume I remember another way to live. The answer settled heavily between us. I watched him quietly after that. The expensive black coat. The silver watch beneath his cuff. The tiny scar near his jaw I had never noticed before. Damien Moretti carried power the way soldiers carried old injuries. Naturally. Constantly. Like eventually it simply became part of your body whether you wanted it or not. 20 minutes later the car turned beneath a private underground entrance guarded by two men in dark coats. They immediately stepped aside the second they recognized Damien. No questions. No hesitation. The elevator ride upward happened in complete silence except for the soft hum of machinery and my heartbeat steadily climbing higher. When the doors finally opened, I forgot how to breathe for a second. The restaurant looked less like a restaurant and more like something hidden inside old money and secrets. Marble floors, amber chandelier light, massive windows overlooking the frozen Chicago skyline. Every table dressed in white linen and crystal glasses that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Conversations softened the moment Damien stepped into the room. Not completely, just enough to notice. People looked up immediately. Men in tailored suits. Women wrapped in diamonds and silk. Politicians. Billionaires. Powerful people. And every single one of them reacted the same way. Respect first. Fear second. My stomach tightened. You were not exaggerating, I murmured. Damien's expression remained unreadable. About what? The entire city being afraid of you. Something cold flickered behind his eyes before disappearing. Fear keeps people predictable. A tall man near the bar suddenly stood as we passed. Maybe late 50s. Expensive navy suit. The kind of face usually photographed beside senators and charity boards. Mr. Moretti, he greeted carefully. Damien barely slowed his stride. Governor. My entire body froze for half a second. Governor. The governor of Illinois had just greeted Damien Moretti like someone you did not keep waiting. I looked at Damien differently after that. Not because I suddenly feared him more. Somehow that part had already happened. No, this was worse. I was beginning to understand the size of his world. The reach of it. The terrifying influence wrapped beneath his calm voice and expensive suits. Damien guided me toward a private table near the windows overlooking the city. The second I sat down, I noticed something else immediately. Every single seat in the restaurant faced the entrance except his. His faced the entire room. Always watching. Always prepared. God, he really lived like this every day. Damien loosened his gloves slowly before looking across the table at me. You are angry, he observed quietly. I am overwhelmed. That too. Candlelight reflected softly in his pale green eyes, while snow drifted beyond the glass behind him. For one strange, suspended moment, the dangerous city outside disappeared completely. Then a voice behind me broke the silence. Damien Moretti bringing a woman here? Smooth. Male. Amused. Now that, the stranger continued, is something I never expected to see. I turned toward the voice and immediately understood why the entire restaurant had gone quieter. The man approaching our table moved with the same effortless confidence Damien carried. But where Damien felt cold and controlled, this man felt sharp. Dangerous in a different way. Mid-30s. Dark blonde hair brushed neatly back. Expensive gray suit. A smile too polished to trust. Adrian Russo. Damien said calmly without standing. Not friendly. Not surprised either. Just careful. Adrian's pale blue eyes slid toward me with obvious curiosity. So the rumors are true. There are no rumors, Damien replied flatly. That is disappointing. I was hoping Chicago's most emotionally unavailable man had finally developed human feelings. I nearly choked on my water. Damien looked deeply unimpressed. Adrian noticed immediately and laughed softly under his breath before extending a hand toward me. Claire Bennett, right? I hesitated briefly before shaking it. How do you know my name? Everyone around Damien knows your name now. My stomach tightened instantly. Damien's expression hardened slightly. Enough, Adrian. The other man lifted both hands in mock surrender before dropping casually into the empty chair beside our table without invitation. Relax. If I wanted to upset her, I would have mentioned the governor leaving your fundraiser crying last spring. I stared at Damien automatically. The governor cried? He exaggerates, Damien said coldly. Adrian grinned. Only slightly. The waiter appeared almost instantly beside the table, as if summoned telepathically. Mr. Moretti, he greeted carefully. Damien barely glanced up. The usual. Of course. Adrian leaned back comfortably while the waiter disappeared again. You know, he said conversationally to me. I have known Damien for 12 years, and this is the first time I have ever seen him bring someone here willingly. Damien's eyes narrowed slightly. You are testing my patience. No, Adrian corrected calmly. I am testing hers. I should have felt intimidated sitting between two men who clearly operated in a world far above mine. Instead, exhaustion finally overpowered fear. Well, congratulations, I said dryly. Everyone in this restaurant has successfully made me uncomfortable. Adrian blinked once before laughing quietly again. I like her. Damien reached for his whiskey glass the second it arrived. That makes one of us. Liar. Something flickered across Damien's expression, then disappeared beneath the rim of his glass. Tiny. Almost invisible. But Adrian noticed it too because his amusement softened briefly into something more thoughtful. Interesting. You really care about her, Adrian murmured quietly. The atmosphere at the table changed instantly. Not dramatic. Just colder. Damien set the glass down carefully. Leave. Adrian raised one eyebrow. Damien. Now. The single word carried enough quiet authority that even I felt it physically. Adrian studied him for a second before sighing softly and standing. Fine. But for the record, I think this is the healthiest thing that has happened to you in years. Damien's jaw tightened. Adrian looked toward me one final time. Miss Bennett, he said politely. If this man starts acting emotionally stable, call me immediately. It means something catastrophic has happened. Before I could answer, he disappeared back into the crowd. Silence settled over the table after he left. I looked toward Damien carefully. You have strange friends. Adrian is not my friend. That was definitely friendship. That was extortion with emotional attachment. Despite myself, I laughed softly. Damien went still again the same way he always did when I laughed around him. Like the sound surprised him every single time. He was right about one thing. I admitted quietly. You do not seem emotionally stable. One corner of his mouth moved faintly. That is because I am not. The honesty caught me off guard again. God, Damien never lied to me. He avoided answers, redirected conversations, built walls out of silence and control. But when he chose to speak honestly, the truth landed hard. The waiter returned carrying dinner plates I absolutely could not pronounce correctly. The entire restaurant still seemed subtly aware of Damien's presence without directly staring. Power lived around him like gravity. Constant. Invisible. Heavy. I picked up my glass slowly. Can I ask you something? You usually do. When you walk into a room like this, I said quietly, glancing around the restaurant, what do people actually feel? Damien looked at me steadily across the candlelight and snow-covered skyline beyond the windows. Most people, he answered softly. Fear. My chest tightened unexpectedly. And me? For the first time all night, Damien looked completely unguarded. Just for a second. You, he said quietly. Look at me like you are trying to decide if I deserve saving. The question settled between us heavier than anything else Damien had said all night. Candlelight flickered softly across the table while snow drifted beyond the massive windows behind him, turning Chicago into a blur of silver and gold. Around us, conversations continued in low-polished murmurs, but suddenly the entire restaurant felt distant. Small, like the world had narrowed down to the man sitting across from me and the dangerous honesty in his eyes. That is a complicated thing to say to someone, I whispered. Damien looked down briefly at the untouched whiskey near his hand. It is a complicated thing to feel. God. The terrifying part was that he meant it. No manipulation. No performance. Just exhaustion wrapped inside truth. I looked away first because holding eye contact with Damien for too long had started feeling dangerous in ways I could not explain. You should not want someone to save you, I murmured quietly. Why not? Because eventually people leave. Silence. Heavy and immediate. When I looked back at him, something in his expression had changed slightly. Softer now. Careful. Someone left you, he observed quietly. I laughed once under my breath without humor. That is not exactly rare. Damien studied me for several seconds before speaking again. You do not talk about yourself much. Neither do you. That is different. Because you are emotionally repressed and intimidating. Another faint, almost smile appeared. Among other reasons. The waiter returned briefly to refill water glasses before disappearing again the second Damien looked up. Everyone in the restaurant moved around him carefully, respectfully, like orbiting something powerful enough to destroy them if they got too close. I finally understood why. It was not just money, not just reputation. Damien carried control the way storms carried lightning. Quietly, naturally. What were you like before all this? I asked before I could stop myself. For the first time that evening, Damien looked genuinely surprised. Before what? Before people started fearing you. His gaze drifted slowly toward the snowy skyline outside. The city lights reflected softly across the glass, while silence stretched between us long enough that I thought he might not answer. Then quietly, almost distant, he said, I used to believe being good mattered. Something in my chest tightened painfully. What changed? A humorless smile touched his mouth. Reality. The answer should have sounded cold. Instead it sounded tired. Deeply tired. I stared at him sitting there in his expensive black suit surrounded by power and influence and fear, and suddenly all I could see was loneliness. Crushing loneliness hidden beneath perfect control. You know what I think? I said softly. Damien's eyes returned to mine immediately. What? I think everyone around you is terrified of disappointing you. Probably. But I think you are even more terrified of disappointing yourself. Silence again. Complete silence. Damien went very still watching me. The restaurant noise faded into background static, while something unspoken shifted quietly between us. Then suddenly his phone buzzed sharply against the table. Everything changed instantly. The warmth disappeared from his expression so fast it physically startled me. Damien looked down at the screen once, and every muscle in his body tightened beneath control. What happened? I asked immediately. He stood without answering. Fast. Too fast. My pulse jumped instantly. Damien. He grabbed his coat from the back of the chair while already reaching for his phone again. We are leaving. Fear crawled slowly into my throat. Why? Damien looked directly at me then, and for the first time since meeting him, I saw something terrifying behind his eyes. Not anger. Not control. Fear. Real fear. Because your apartment building just lost power, he said quietly. Cold spread through my entire body. What does that mean? Damien moved around the table immediately, his hand finding the small of my back, guiding me toward the private exit before I could argue. The entire restaurant seemed to notice at once. Men stood subtly. Security shifted positions near the doors. Even the staff moved faster. Efficient. Controlled. Prepared. Damien. I whispered sharply, struggling to keep up with him. Talk to me. He glanced down at me briefly while snow whipped violently against the windows outside. It means Victor is no longer asking permission to send messages. The elevator doors opened instantly the second we reached them. Damien stepped inside beside me, one arm still protectively behind my back, while his phone remained clenched tightly in his other hand. The doors closed. Silence surrounded us. Then softly, Almost to himself, Damien said something I was never supposed to hear. I should have kept her away from this. The drive across the city felt unreal. Snow hammered against the windshield while Damien's convoy cut through downtown Chicago like something out of a nightmare I had accidentally stepped into. Black SUVs surrounded us on every side. Men spoke quietly through earpieces. Traffic lights seemed to change before we even reached them. The entire city bent around Damien Moretti when he decided it needed to. And somehow, somewhere along the way, my life had started bending with it. I sat beside him in silence, gripping the edge of the leather seat, while tension rolled off him so heavily it almost filled the car. Damien had not looked at his phone once in the last 10 minutes. That scared me more than if he had been shouting into it. "Say something," I whispered finally. His pale green eyes stayed fixed on the snowy streets ahead. "Your apartment building was evacuated safely." Relief hit first, then confusion. Evacuated because of what? A long pause. "A gas leak." I turned toward him immediately. "And was it actually a gas leak?" Silence answered me before he did. No, fear settled cold in my stomach again. Outside the windows, snow coated the city in white, while skyscrapers disappeared into storm clouds above us. Damien's hands tightened slightly around the steering wheel before relaxing again. Tiny movement. Controlled. But I noticed it anyway. "You blamed yourself back there," I said quietly. His jaw flexed once. "Because this is my fault." "No." The answer came out sharper than I intended. Damien glanced toward me briefly, genuine surprise flickering across his face. "Claire." "No." I repeated softer this time. "You do not get to carry responsibility for every terrible person in your world." Something unreadable crossed his expression before disappearing. "You still think there is good left in me. I think you are exhausted from pretending there is not." Silence settled heavily between us again, while snow drifted endlessly across the windshield. Then suddenly Damien laughed once under his breath. Quiet. Tired. "You really are dangerous." "Excuse me." He finally looked directly at me then. Fully. No walls. No cold mask. Just exhaustion and honesty and something painfully human underneath all the power. "Everyone else sees what I became," he said quietly. "You keep looking for who I was before it." The words hit somewhere deep enough to ache. I stared at him sitting there in the dim glow of dashboard lights, wearing an expensive black coat and carrying an entire violent world on his shoulders like punishment. Then softly, before I could second-guess myself, I asked, "Who were you before all this?" Damien looked away toward the storm outside. The city lights reflected faintly in his eyes. "Someone softer." The answer nearly broke my heart. 20 minutes later, the convoy pulled beneath the private entrance of a towering high-rise overlooking Lake Michigan. Men in dark coats surrounded the building entrance before Damien even opened my car door. Snow whipped violently around us while he guided me inside, with one steady hand at my back. Warmth swallowed us immediately. Marble floors, golden lights, quiet luxury everywhere. But Damien barely noticed any of it. His attention stayed entirely on me. "You are staying here tonight," he said calmly while the elevator doors opened. "Absolutely not. Claire, I have work tomorrow. You almost had strangers waiting outside your apartment tonight." I folded my arms tightly. "You cannot solve every problem by locking me inside some billionaire fortress." Something dangerously close to frustration flashed across his face before disappearing again. "I am trying to keep you alive." The raw honesty in his voice silenced me instantly. The elevator carried us upward in quiet tension until finally the doors opened into a private penthouse wrapped in floor-to-ceiling glass and city lights. Chicago stretched endlessly below us, glowing beneath falling snow like another universe entirely. I stepped slowly into the enormous living room while Damien remained near the elevator behind me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then softly, almost careful, I said, "You know what scares me most about you?" His gaze lifted immediately. "What?" I turned toward him fully. "It is not your power." Silence. Heavy and immediate. "It is how lonely you are inside all of it." Damien went completely still. The city glowed behind him in silver and gold while snow drifted endlessly beyond the glass. And for the first time since I met Damien Moretti, the most feared man in Chicago looked at me like I had just seen the one thing he spent his entire life trying to hide.